Okay, so in this lecture, I'm going to show you a couple of one really good application that where the loop can be used. Actually, there's a couple of typical applications where the loop can be used. For example, finding the average, finding the sum, the total, and then finding counting matches, like finding the maximum value and minimum value, right? There are many different applications where you can use a loop. And one good example is this, in a sum example. And in this case, they use a sentinel value. So as long as the user does not enter a empty string, it's going to loop, right? And then it's going to add all the value, right? Compute the total of all the values that the user enters. So that's the example. So, but in I'm going to really make this example a little bit simpler. And then I want to write a program. I want to write a program which compute all the integers from 1 to the value specified by the program. So the example is, let's say, I want to write a program to compute if the last value is, let's say, 5, and then I want to write my program will compute the sum of all the values, all the integer values from 1 to 5. So for example, your sum is going to be 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, right? And so I'm going to write this program. So the first, let's say last is equal to 5, and then at this point your sum, because I have not added anything, let's say 0. So I have a variable name called sum and last, and then I need another variable to represent the integer value. So I'll just call it num, a number. At this point the number is 1, right? And then I need to have a while loop, while, right? And then as long as num is less than or equal to the last is, in this case, is 5, right? So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, and right now this is my num, right? 1. So basically I have what? I have 3 different variables, right? One is the last, now it's a 5, and then sum at this point is a 0, and then the num is 1, right? This 1. And then I have to have some indentation here, and then I'll say sum is equal to sum, the same variable name, sum is equal to sum plus num, which is this value, the num. And then I'm going to increase, so I add this first number 1 to the sum is a 0, right? And then I'm going to increment this num by 1. So num is going to be incremented, num by 1. So in the next loop, then my num is going to be 2. In the next loop, my num is going to be 3, and etc. Okay, so let's just okay, now and after that we're going to print what? We're going to print sum, right? After while loop terminates, we are going to print sum. So this loop will execute until this num reaches a 5, which is a last value, right? And let's trace this loop. Okay, the first thing that when the most important thing when you learn loop is you should be able to trace down this execution. Okay, so let's just trace down this loop. The first one is what? So let's just make the table. Table is like a loop, and then you have variable called num, right? And then you have variable called sum. So at the very beginning, right, before even getting to the loop, the very beginning num is 1, right? Num is 1. As you can see, num is 1. And then the sum is a 0, right? The sum is a 0. The sum is a 0. And once, let's look at the Boolean expression in the while loop. The num, which is 1, 1 is less than or equal to 5. This is true, so it's going to execute the next statement. The sum is sum plus num. So at this time, the sum is a 0, right? So 0 plus, and then what is a num? Num is 1, right? 1. So your sum is what? Becomes now is 1. 0 plus 1 is 1. And then your num is 1, right? So now, okay, by the way, sum is now is 1. And then your num is increment by 1. So your num is num plus 1. So 1 plus 1 is a 2, right? So your num is now 2. Right? So this is loop number 1. So then it's going to this while loop. And the num is what? It said num is 2. 2 is less than 5, yes. So it's going to execute this statement. Okay? So by the way, this is like another way of looking at this computation. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, right? At the loop number 1, sum is basically this value, 0 plus 1. The loop number 1, okay? And then loop number 2, since its num is less than 5, your sum is what? The previous old sum is what? 0 plus 1, right? This is old sum, and your num is now 2. So plus 2. And then you increment num by 1, so your num becomes 3. So increment by 1. So now 0 plus 1 plus 2 is a 3, right? So your sum is a 3. The num becomes a 3. And the loop number 3, right? 3 is, so let's go back to the loop. The 3 is less than 5, yes. And the sum, this is old sum, which is 0 plus 1 plus 2. And then your now num value is a 3, right? Your num value is a 3. This num value is a 3. So I'm going to 3. Right? And then I increment num value by 4. By 1. So my num becomes 4. Right? So in the second loop, basically I just calculate this is my sum. The third loop, basically this is my what? This is my sum. 1 plus 2 plus 3. Okay? And now let's look at the loop number 4. And obviously this is going to be what? The 4 is what? This 4 is less than a 5. And then I'm going to do this. Sum, my old sum is increment by a num, which is 4. Which is 4. Right? And then I increment my num by 1, right? Num by 1. So 5. Okay? And then go to the loop. Then num 5 is less than or equal to 5. Yes. So I'm going to the loop number 5. And this is my old what? By the way, up to loop number 4, right? Loop number 4. Now this is my sum. And then loop number 5, right? Is it 5? That's my num value. So plus what? 5. Right? This is like my sum. My sum now has just, I add all the value. This is my sum. Oh, by the way, I forgot to increment this. Now 4, and then now this is 5, and then what? This is what? This is a 3, right? And then this is what? 6. So 6, and this is 10, right? And then it's 10, and then now what? I just add 5. So, and this I increment on my num by 1, so this is becomes 6. So this is a 6, and then what? I just added 5, right? So this total sum is 15. So 15, right? So, and then now is that, so I'm going to the loop. Is that 6? My num value is a 6. The 6 is less than or equal to 5? No. This is a false, right? This is a false. So it's going to exit out of this loop, this while loop. Since this Boolean expression becomes false, these 2 lines is not going to be executed. And then, so that's the end of the loop, and then I'm going to print sum, right? And then the sum is what? And then it's going to print 15. Okay, so basically this is the how this loop, this table really. So how many loops? 5 loops, right? So basically this table shows you the execution flow of this while loop. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to end my lecture here.